You guys won't starve for 3 days. Be good at home and I'll bring you a present when I get back. That was the last thing Michael, my husband, said before the sound of the deadbolt sliding home echoed twice, dry and cruel. I stood frozen behind the heavy oak door, pressing my ear to the wood, listening as his hurried footsteps faded into the distance. The engine of a car turned over, roared to life, and then sped off into the early morning light, taking with it all the malice of a man with whom I had once shared my life. He had locked me, his wife, and our 3-year-old son in our own suburban home. My name is Emily, and I'm 29 years old. And the story I'm about to tell isn't a nightmare, but the raw and painful reality I was forced to live. A truth that, when it came to light, compelled my own mother-in-law. A woman I believed barely tolerated me to wield a sledgehammer to smash down that door while screaming through tears. "Open up your husband. My son, he's in serious trouble. 5 years of marriage." I had come to believe I had a life many would envy. My husband, Michael, was a VP of sales, a handsome, charismatic man. We had a 3-year-old son, Leo, who was my entire world. To the outside world, everyone admired us, praising our happy and complete family, a perfect picture without a single blemish. But only the one sleeping in the bed knows what the sheets are like. Our marriage had grown cold for over a year, ever since Valerie, Michael's old college girlfriend, suddenly reappeared. That morning, he told me he had an urgent business trip to Miami for 3 days. "This project is crucial," he said, quoting his business partner. "It's a bit complicated, so I probably won't have much time to call. Take good care of Leo at home." I suspected nothing. I had even woken up early to press his best suit and make him a hot breakfast. I walked him to the door, silently wishing him a safe trip. I never imagined it was all a meticulously calculated lie, a perfect charade to cover up his monstrous behavior. When the sound of the car disappeared completely, I realized with horror that he wasn't joking. I grabbed the doorknob, turned it hard, and pulled in vain. The door was like an immovable stone wall. "Michael, what kind of joke is this? Open the door," I screamed, desperately pounding on the wood. Only the most terrifying silence answered me. I ran to the back door. The iron security gate was also locked with a large padlock from the outside. All the windows had security bars. Our home, my sanctuary, had become an inescapable prison. A dreadful panic seized me. I grabbed my phone in a hurry and dialed Michael's number. "The number you have dialed is not available at this time." The operator's impersonal voice was like a stab to my last hope. I went into WhatsApp to send him a message, and froze when I read the line. "You have been blocked by this contact." He had cut off all communication. The blood in my veins turned to ice. This wasn't a sick joke. It was a deliberate act, a plan laid with inhuman cruelty. He really wanted to lock my son and me in here. But why? What had I done to deserve such horrifying treatment? I sank to the cold floor, tears streaming uncontrollably. I wasn't afraid for myself, but for my son. Suddenly, I remembered his words before he left. "I'm locking up, so you'll be safer. Be good at home." Was the safety he spoke of just to ensure no one could interrupt his business trip with his lover? And then an even more terrible thought crossed my mind. The night before, I had wanted to go to the grocery store, but he stopped me, saying it was better to wait for the weekend and go together. I ran to the refrigerator and yanked open the door. My heart stopped. Inside, apart from a couple of bottles of water and a half-empty carton of milk, there was absolutely nothing. The freezer was empty, the vegetable drawer was empty, the bag of rice had also run out 2 days ago. He had calculated everything. He hadn't just locked us in, he wanted to starve us. His words echoed in my head, sharp and poisonous. "You guys won't starve for 3 days. 3 days." He had planned to imprison us for 3 days without food or water. His cruelty surpassed anything I could have imagined. How could a father treat his own son with such malice? I couldn't cry anymore. The pain had transformed into an uncontrollable rage. I couldn't break down. I had to survive. I had to find a way out of here for my son. Just then, from upstairs, I heard Leo's clear, innocent voice. "Mommy, I'm hungry." That call was like 1,000 needles stabbing my bleeding heart. I quickly wiped my tears, trying to regain my composure, and ran upstairs to hug him. "Mommy's here, my love. Mommy's here." What could I do within these 4 walls? What could I do to save my son? The chill emanating from the empty refrigerator hit my face, but it was nothing compared to the ice spreading from my own heart. My son's cry of hunger was like a command that snapped me out of my stupor. I slammed the refrigerator door shut as if to also close out the cruel truth before my eyes. "Mommy's here, Leo, my sweet boy. Mommy's going to find something for you to eat, okay?" I lifted him into my arms, forcing a smile that I knew was more of a grimace than a comforting gesture. My mind screamed at me to act. I set Leo down on the sofa and gave him his favorite toy car. Stay here and play for a little bit, honey. Mommy's going to look for the key to open the door. I'm sure Daddy is just playing a little joke on us. My son nodded with his pure eyes, not yet understanding the gravity of the situation. And I began my desperate search like an animal caught in a trap. I ran to the front door again, using all my strength to shake it to beat on it, but I only got the dull thud of my body against the solid wood. I went back to the rear door looking for something hard enough to break the padlock. But there was nothing. All the familiar objects in the house now seemed terribly useless. I went up to the second floor looking desperately through the barred windows. Our house was in a rather isolated suburban community. The nearest neighbor's house was separated by a wide yard. I screamed, "Help, is anyone there, help," but my cries seemed to be swallowed by the morning silence. Not a single person in sight, not a single response. I went back to my phone with the faint hope of calling someone other than Michael. I dialed my mother-in-law, Carol. "The number you have dialed is not available." I was paralyzed. It couldn't be. I dialed my mother's number and the same impersonal voice answered. I called my best friend. The result was the same. Trembling, I opened my network settings. The signal bar was completely empty. He hadn't just blocked me on WhatsApp. He had found a way to completely deactivate my SIM card. Maybe he had reported it lost or used some other trick I didn't know about. The house's Wi-Fi was still working, but it was useless when all the calling apps required verification through my phone number. I was completely cut off from the outside world. Panic turned into pure terror. Michael had woven a perfect plan down to the smallest detail, leaving my son and me no escape. "Mommy, I'm hungry." Leo's weak call from the living room brought me back to harsh reality. I ran downstairs and hugged him. "I'm sorry, my love, I'm so sorry." I began a second search, this time for food. I rummaged through every corner of the kitchen. In the snack cabinet, I found half a package of old, slightly stale crackers. In the fruit bowl, a somewhat wrinkled apple. I hastily opened the package and gave my son a cracker. He took it happily and began to chew it eagerly. Seeing him like that was like someone stabbing me in the heart. My son, to whom I had always given the best, now had to eat a stale cracker to quell his hunger. I cut the apple in half, peeled it carefully, one half for him and saved the other. I didn't dare to eat. I had to save it. Save every bite because I didn't know how long this nightmare would last. From the milk carton in the fridge, I only dared to pour him a small glass. "Drink slowly, honey," I said with a heavy heart. I tried to think if there could be anything else edible in the house. The gas stove worked, but there was nothing to cook. Suddenly, I remembered the bag of rice. I clearly remembered buying a new one, 0-pound bag, just a few days ago. At least we could make some plain white rice to survive. A ray of hope. I stumbled to the corner of the pantry where the rice dispenser Michael had given me for our anniversary was. He had even said, "With this, my love, you'll never have to worry about us running out of rice." What a bitter irony. Trembling, I opened the lid. The sight inside made me lose my balance, and I had to lean against the wall. There wasn't a single grain of rice. The dispenser wasn't just empty. It was spotlessly clean, as if someone had scrubbed it thoroughly. The new bag of rice I had bought was gone. It was at that moment that I understood the full truth. This was not an oversight. It wasn't that we had run out of food by chance. He had deliberately emptied the house. He had calculated leaving a little water, a little milk, and a few crackers. Enough so that we wouldn't die immediately. Enough so that we would suffer the torment of hunger slowly and painfully. This cruelty was no longer that of a husband. It was that of a demon. The rice dispenser, empty and chillingly clean, completely extinguished the last spark of hope I had left. I slid down to the cold kitchen floor, my back against a cabinet, feeling not panic anymore but an absolute void. My mind was spinning not from hunger but from a single question that drilled into my soul. Why? Why could Michael treat us, his son and me, like this? 5 years of love, the wedding vows, was it all a farce? In my daze, memories came flooding back as clear as a slow-motion movie. I remembered the first day I met Michael. It was a rainy afternoon in New York. I was taking shelter under a shop awning when he appeared holding a large umbrella. "Need to share for a bit," his voice was warm. His kind smile dispelled the gloom of the gray day. In those days, he was a guy from a small town trying to make his way in the big city, and I was a young, newly graduated editor full of dreams. We fell in love quickly, a pure and intense love. He was gallant, attentive, always knew how to make me happy. He said he loved my sweetness, my intelligence, and my dreamy soul. He promised to spend the rest of his life protecting me, and I believed him. I believed him without question. We married 2 years later with the blessings of friends and family. The first years of marriage were a true paradise. He rose quickly in his job, becoming a VP of sales. I also had a stable job and a good salary. We bought this house together, building our home piece by piece. The day Leo was born, I still remember the moment he held him in his arms, his eyes filled with tears of happiness. "Thank you, Emily," he said. "Thank you for giving me a complete family." I etched those words in my heart, considering them proof of an eternal love, but the happiness began to crack without me realizing it. Perhaps it was a little over a year ago at his college reunion. That day, Valerie Michael's ex-girlfriend, whom he said he had cut all contact with, suddenly appeared. She was still as beautiful as ever, but the way she looked at Michael had something of longing and provocation. That night, Michael drank too much. When we got home, he kept muttering Valerie's name in his sleep. My heart ached, but I told myself it was just the alcohol. A bit of nostalgia for the past. I chose to stay silent and trust my husband. But my silence became consent. From that day on, Michael began to change. He left earlier and came home later. Urgent business trips became more frequent. He stopped sharing office stories with me. The warm, nightly hugs disappeared. He became irritable and snapped at me for no reason. Once I just casually asked why he was late, and he yelled, "What's it to you? I'm coming from work. Where else? Stop trying to control me." I was stunned. He had never raised his voice to me like that. The signs became more and more obvious. The scent of an unknown woman's perfume on his shirts, the hushed phone calls in the bathroom, the hastily deleted messages whenever I got close. My heart burned, but I kept clinging to the last shred of faith. I was afraid. Afraid that if I made a scene, our family would break. Afraid that my son wouldn't have a complete home. I chose to deceive myself. My mother-in-law, Carol, had always been a strict woman of few words. Since I married, we were never very close, but she had never made things difficult for me either. However, lately her attitude had also become very strange. She would often look at me with an expression of pity and sigh from time to time. Once she came to visit, and seeing Michael yelling at me, she frowned and said, "You're a man. How can you talk to your wife like that?" Michael just left in a huff. At that moment, I was even grateful to her, thinking that at least someone in that family understood me. But now, connecting all the pieces, I realized a terrible truth. Those signs, those changes were not coincidental. They were part of a plan. Michael was not just cheating on me. He had a conspiracy directed against my son and me. And the act of locking us in today was the final step of that plan. He wanted to corner us. But for what? So he could run off with Valerie with a clear conscience. No, it wasn't that simple. A man who can let his own 3-year-old son starve to death. His goal was certainly not limited to a simple love affair. "Mommy, I'm thirsty." Leo's weak voice pulled me out of my memories again. I looked at my son. He was standing in the kitchen doorway, his face pale with hunger. The pain in my heart turned into a monumental rage. Whatever his plan, whatever his purpose, what he was doing to his own son was an unforgivable crime. I couldn't just sit here lamenting the past. I had to act. I had to live, find a way to get my son out of this place. And I swear, Michael, you will pay for everything you've done. But first, I had to face an enemy even more fearsome than his evil, the hunger and the darkness of the long night ahead. Darkness fell faster than I had expected. The last faint light of dusk vanished behind the window bars, leaving the spacious house plunged into a dense, icy blackness. I held Leo tightly huddled on the living room sofa. He had fallen asleep a while ago after drinking the last drops of milk from the carton. His steady breathing on my neck was the only warmth left in this house, now a tomb of ice. I didn't dare turn on the lights, not to save electricity, but out of fear. Fear that the light would only further highlight our emptiness and loneliness. Fear that it would dispel the fragile illusion that this was all just a dream. That when I opened my eyes, Michael would be back, would laugh, and say, "I was just playing a prank on you." But I knew that was just an illusion. Hunger began to torture me. My stomach twisted in dull, persistent cramps. I tried to drink small sips of water to fill the void, but it only made the hunger more intense. I looked at my son sleeping in my arms and felt an infinite sorrow. He had been hungry all day. Tomorrow, when he woke up, what would I give him to eat? The half a cracker that was left, or a few spoonfuls of sugar water. These thoughts were like invisible knives stabbing my mind. I felt like a useless, helpless mother. I couldn't protect my son. I couldn't even give him a decent meal. Self-reproach and hatred for Michael mixed, creating a poison that corroded my soul. I wondered where he was right now, what he was doing. Surely he was with Valerie in a luxury hotel in Miami, having a candlelit dinner, drinking wine and laughing. Would he remember even for a moment that at home his wife and son were hungry and cold, or had our existence already been completely erased from his mind? It started to rain outside. At first it was just light drops gently tapping on the roof, but the rain intensified, lashing against the window panes, creating mournful sounds. The wind howled through the cracks like the wail of a tormented soul. The large house was now like a lone ship adrift in a stormy sea, and my son and I were its desperate passengers, not knowing what tomorrow would bring. I hugged him even tighter as if I feared the storm might snatch him away from me. Leo stirred slightly, his small lips parted. Maybe he was cold too. I took off my thin cardigan and covered him with it. Fumbling in the darkness, I took the tablecloth from the dining table and wrapped us both in it. But the cold wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from the depths of my being. I looked out the window where lightning occasionally tore through the night sky, briefly illuminating the yard. I suddenly thought of my mother-in-law, Carol. Normally around 9 p.m., she would always call to ask about her grandson. But tonight my phone remained silent. Michael had surely told her some lie. Maybe he said we had gone to visit my family in my hometown or some other excuse convincing enough for her not to call. His whole family together had woven a perfect net to trap us. Suddenly, a small creak came from the staircase. My heart stopped. I held my breath, straining my ears. There was a very faint noise, but there was definitely a noise. Was there someone in the house? No, impossible. All the doors were locked tight. But the noise repeated this time clearer, like stealthy footsteps on the wooden floor. A shiver ran down my spine. Could it be that we weren't alone? Had Michael left someone to watch us? Or something even more terrible? I hugged my son with all my might, backing into the corner of the sofa. My eyes wide open, fixed on the darkness that enveloped the staircase area. I didn't dare to breathe deeply. I could only wait in a terrifying silence. The footsteps were getting closer, not from upstairs, but as if they were coming from a dark corner of the living room itself. In the dense darkness, the stealthy steps drew closer and closer, clearer and clearer. My heart felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. I held Leo tightly. My body trembled not from the cold, but from a primal fear that seized every one of my cells. I held my breath, trying to calm the frantic beating of my heart, my gaze fixed on the dark space in front of me where the sound was coming from. Any small movement at that moment could be a sign of mortal danger. Meow? A small, weak meow sounded right at my feet, followed by the sensation of something soft and furry brushing against my leg. I jumped, almost screamed. On reflex, I grabbed the TV remote from the coffee table, intending to use it as a weapon. But then another flash of lightning lit up the room for a brief moment. I looked down and let out a sigh of relief. It was Miko, our calico cat we'd had for several years. It turned out he had been hiding under the sofa all day. The fear vanished, leaving only extreme exhaustion. I collapsed back onto the sofa, laughing bitterly. Even the cat had scared me like this. How weak and paranoid had I become? Miko rubbed his head against my lap, purring softly as if to comfort me. I stroked his soft fur and the tears started to flow again. At least in this cold, lonely house, I still had this little creature by my side. The rain subsided, leaving only the monotonous sound of drops falling on the porch. The night passed in a terrifying silence. I couldn't sleep a wink. I just sat there holding my son, listening to his steady breathing and the cat's purring. The hunger still tormented me, but the worry about tomorrow was even greater. What was I going to do? The dawn of the second day arrived without bringing any warmth or hope. The grayish light of a rainy day filtered through the bars, casting a somber and gloomy light in the room. Leo woke up. He no longer cried for food. He just lay in my arms, looking at me with his big, tired eyes. "Mommy, I'm tired," he said in a weak voice. I touched his forehead. It was burning. He was starting to get a fever. The panic I had managed to suppress during the night erupted with overwhelming force. My son was sick, in a closed space, without food and without medicine. What could I do? I quickly carried him to the bathroom, turned on the lukewarm water, and used a towel to cool him down and try to lower his fever, but it was only a temporary solution. I knew that if he didn't eat, if he didn't get medicine, he wouldn't get better. "Michael, you monster! Open the door!" I screamed, using the last of my strength to pound on the door. "Leo has a fever. Do you hear me? Do you want to kill your own son?" I pounded until my hands were red and burning. I screamed until my throat was hoarse and sore, but the only answer was the same deathly silence. I ran through the whole house once more looking for something. Anything. In vain. My gaze fell on the landline phone in a corner of the living room. A glimmer of hope. Could it be possible? Could he have only disabled the cell phones but forgotten about the landline? I ran to. It picked up the receiver. No dial tone. He had cut the phone line too. A flawless preparation. I fell to the floor holding my feverish son. The helplessness almost consumed me. I had tried everything. I had screamed myself hoarse, but it was all useless. We were like two ants trapped in a sealed box waiting in despair. I looked out at the yard. The rain had stopped leaving puddles on the flagstones. A few fallen yellow leaves were stuck together. Such a desolate scene. I had to do something. I couldn't just wait here to die. I looked up at the ceiling where the ostentatious crystal chandelier Michael had installed with his own hands hung. "This lamp will light up our home forever," he had said. Now it was just a cold, inanimate ornament, a witness to our tragedy. Suddenly, a wild idea came to me. I looked at the bars on the windows. They were made of solid iron, very sturdy. But what about the screws that fixed them to the wall? Maybe they weren't so strong. If I could find something hard enough to use as a lever, maybe, just maybe, I could pry one of the bars off. But what would I use? The kitchen knives were too thin. They would break. The chair legs were too thick. I scanned the room and my eyes stopped on a dark corner behind the TV stand. There, leaning against the wall, was an object whose existence I had almost forgotten. It was a long iron golf club about the thickness of a wrist. A gift an old business partner had given Michael. He had never used it. It was just for decoration. But now in my eyes, it wasn't a golf club. It was hope. It was the only key to open the door to life for my son and me. The metal golf club felt cold and heavy in my hands, but at that moment, it gave me a strange sense of security. I carefully placed Leo, who was delirious with fever, on the sofa, covering him with my only cardigan. "Be good, honey. Wait for Mommy for a moment. Mommy's going to open the window to let in some fresh air," I whispered, kissing his burning forehead. He just nodded weakly, his sleepy eyes barely able to stay open. I knew I didn't have much time. My son's fever was getting worse, and hunger was also draining my last reserves of strength. I dragged a chair to the living room window, the one most hidden from the street. I took a deep breath and used the head of the golf club to try to pry into the gap between the bar and the wall. Clang! A dry metallic sound echoed against the concrete. The plaster around the first screw began to flake off in small pieces. It was working. My heart pounded a spark of hope. I used all my strength, gripping the club with both hands, turning it into a lever. I pushed, pried, and struck. Sweat ran down my back, soaking my clothes. My hands, used only to typing and turning pages, were now blistered and aching. But I didn't dare stop. Every time I thought about giving up, I looked at my son lying on the sofa. His image was like a stimulant that gave me new strength. The plaster flaked off more and more, revealing a screw that had begun to rust but was still firmly anchored to the wall. The golf club, slippery with sweat, slipped from my hands several times. I bit my lip until it bled, the salty taste of blood mixed with sweat and tears. I don't know how long I struggled like that. Half an hour, an hour. Time in this prison seemed to have lost its meaning. Crack. A small but clear sound. The first screw had bent. The gap between the bar and the wall had widened a little. I cried with joy. I continued with the second screw, then the third. As I went on, I gained more experience. I no longer used brute force blindly, but found the right fulcrum, using the weight of my entire body to create the greatest possible leverage. After nearly 2 hours of struggle, the first iron bar finally loosened. I used my hands to bend it to the side, creating a gap just big enough for a 3-year-old child to pass through. But not me. I looked outside. The drop from the window to the ground was over 6 feet. If I dropped my son, he would surely get hurt. I couldn't do that. I sat on the floor, panting, my head spinning from hunger and exhaustion. My plan had half failed. I could get my son out, but I would be trapped. Leaving him alone outside in his condition was even more dangerous. What could I do? I looked around the room, desperately searching for a solution, and my eyes fell on the coiled cord of the vacuum cleaner in a corner. Another idea, even riskier, came to mind. I could tie the cord to my son, tie the other end to a heavy object inside the house, and lower him down slowly. But it was too dangerous. The cord could slip, Leo could get hurt. I didn't dare risk my son's life like that. I was on the verge of giving up. All my efforts seemed to lead me to another dead end. I crawled towards the sofa. I looked at my son, his face flushed, his breathing becoming more ragged. "Mommy, water," he whispered in his delirium. Water. Of course. At least I had to give him water. I ran to the kitchen and turned on the faucet. Cool water flowed out. I filled a glass and ran back. But just as I was returning to the living room, the stream of water from the tap slowed, trickled, and then stopped completely. I froze. I turned the faucet on again. Not a drop. I ran to the bathroom, turned on the shower, the sink faucet, all silent. He had cut off the water. Michael, that husband, that father, had cruelly cut off our last source of life. He didn't want to give us any chance. He wanted us to die a slow and painful death in our own home. That horrible truth was like the final hammer blow that shattered what was left of my sanity. I couldn't stand. I staggered against the wall. Everything around me began to grow dark. I no longer felt hunger. I no longer felt the pain in my hands. I only felt a cold that reached my bones, the cold of absolute despair. But just as I was about to faint, a strange sound, a very low beep, came from the front door, from a place I had never paid attention to. Amid the eerie silence of the house, that small, lonely beep sounded like a signal from another world. I paused, trying to concentrate to determine where the sound was coming from. It repeated, brief and decisive. It was coming from the front door right below the lock. I crawled over, crouching down to look closely. It was a small, black metal box embedded in the wall next to the door frame with a tiny red LED light blinking. I had lived here for almost 5 years. I had gone in and out of that door thousands of times, but I had never noticed its existence. What was it? An alarm device or something else? I touched the cold metal surface. I tried to press the red light, but nothing happened. In my delirium from hunger and exhaustion, my mind suddenly became strangely lucid. I started to connect the dots, the seemingly casual actions of my mother-in-law, Carol, in recent times. I had always thought of her as a traditional, strict woman who didn't particularly like me, but didn't hate me either. She kept a certain distance, and I respected that. But in the last few months, her behavior had been very different. I remembered that about 2 months ago, she suddenly called me to talk privately. "Emily," she said in a thoughtful voice, "this house is so big. Don't you and the boy feel a little lonely?" At the time, I just smiled and told her that with Leo running around all day, I didn't feel lonely. But thinking about it now, what a strange question. Then another time she came to visit, she saw me struggling with the malfunctioning security camera system. She said nothing, just stood there, watching for a long time with a pensive look. "Leave it, dear," she said. "These electronic things are so complicated. Wait for Michael to get back and look at it." But the next day, she called to ask if I had fixed the cameras yet, and recommended a technician she trusted, saying he was very careful and discreet, and the most suspicious detail. I remembered that about a week ago, just before Michael left on his trip, my mother-in-law came over unannounced. She brought Leo a new toy robot. While I was distracted, she walked through the entire house from the living room, the kitchen, to the back door. As she walked, she muttered, "A house needs to be secure. Locks need to be tight. There are so many burglars these days." When she left, as she passed the front door, she stopped for a long time, staring at the area around the lock. I even thought she was checking if the lock had a problem. She even ran her hand over the wall, right where the black box I had just discovered was. At the time, I just thought she was a cautious woman, worried about the safety of her children and grandchildren. But now, as all these pieces fit together, they formed a completely different picture. This mysterious black box, the discreet camera technician, her words full of innuendo. Could it be? Could my mother-in-law have known something? Could she have anticipated Michael's actions? No, impossible. She was his mother. How could she know her son was about to do something so terrible and not stop him? Or was she also part of this plan? That thought made me shudder, but I dismissed it. The look of pity she gave me the sighs when Michael yelled at me. That was not the look of an accomplice. It was the look of a mother, a grandmother, who harbored an unspeakable sorrow. So what was this black box? And why was it installed so secretly? I looked again at the red dot blinking rhythmically. It was like an eye watching in silence, recording the entire tragedy unfolding in this house. Dizziness forced me to lean against the wall. The hunger and my son's fever were draining my last strength. I couldn't keep speculating. I had to do something. I looked at my son lying unconscious on the sofa, his breathing faint. I had no other options left. I went back to the window, grabbed the golf club. This time I didn't try to force the bars. I aimed directly at the glass. Crash. A deafening sound of shattering glass. Shards flew everywhere, but I didn't care. I needed to make noise, a noise loud enough to attract someone's attention. Anyone's. I continued to smash the window frame with the golf club hitting the bars. The sound of clashing metal echoed through the quiet subdivision. As I hit, I screamed, Help! Help! Is anyone there? Help us! I didn't know if anyone would hear me. I only knew this was my last effort. If this time failed too, my son and I might not survive. I smashed until the golf club was almost bent. My hands were bleeding. And then, when I was almost exhausted on the verge of collapsing, I heard a sound in the distance. A sound that wasn't the wind or the rain. It was the siren of a car getting closer and closer. But whose was it? An ambulance, the police, or someone I couldn't even imagine. The siren grew closer, urgent and pressing. It was like a shot of adrenaline that pulled me back from the brink of despair. I leaned on the broken window frame, trying to stand up. My eyes, unfocused from exhaustion, looked towards the front gate. A car, not a police car, just a regular sedan, screeched to a halt. The door flew open, but the person who got out was not a police officer or a paramedic. That figure was so familiar. It was my mother-in-law, Carol. My heart stopped for a second. Why was she here at this moment? Hadn't Michael lied to her saying we'd gone out of town? She arrived alone, looking agitated and worried. But what terrified me more was the object she held in her hand. It wasn't a purse or a basket of fruit as usual. It was a sledgehammer, the kind construction workers use, gleaming under the dim afternoon light. What was she doing? I couldn't understand anything. I saw her run to the front gate, looking inside. "Emily, Leo, is anyone in there?" she shouted. Her voice was no longer her usual stern tone, but was filled with panic. I tried to scream back, but my throat was so raw I could only make weak sounds. She didn't hear me. She started smashing the padlock on the gate with the sledgehammer. Clang, clang. The deafening sounds echoed, shaking everything. She was hitting it with a fury that didn't seem to belong to a 60-year-old woman. Where did that strength come from? From anger or from an even greater fear? A few more blows and the padlock gave way. She threw the sledgehammer to the ground and ran into the yard like a whirlwind. She didn't go to the front door, but ran straight to where I was by the broken window. When she saw me with my disheveled hair, messy clothes, and bloody hands, she froze. Her eyes widened, filled with horror and pity. "My God, Emily, what happened to you?" Then she looked inside the house, saw Leo unconscious on the sofa, his face red with fever. She didn't say another word. She just took a few steps back, picked up the sledgehammer again, and went to the front door. This time she didn't hit the lock. She aimed directly at the hinges. Crack, a huge bang. The solid oak door vibrated violently. "Michael, are you in there? Open this door right now," she screamed. Her voice tore through the silence, filled with a mother's fury and despair. "If you don't open up, I'm going to tear this damn house down, boom boom." She continued to strike. Each blow unleashed all her pent-up rage. I was inside, paralyzed, unable to believe what I was seeing. The mother-in-law I thought was an accomplice, part of the conspiracy, was now using her own strength to break down the door to hell and save us. Why? What had happened? After a dozen blows, one of the hinges flew off. The door creaked open. Carol threw the sledgehammer aside and threw her whole body against the door. The heavy wooden door finally gave way, swinging open and crashing against the wall. Carol ran in, panting, her forehead drenched in sweat. Without even looking at me, she ran straight to Leo. She took her grandson in her arms. Her trembling hand touched his forehead. "He's burning up." "That goddamn animal," she cursed, and tears began to stream down her cheeks. Then she turned to look at me. Her gaze was no longer one of panic, but of deep pain and remorse. She came over and hugged both of us. Her hug was clumsy, stiff, but incredibly warm. "I'm sorry, dear. I'm so sorry," she sobbed. Still in shock, I could only stammer, "Carol, why?" She let me go, hastily wiped her tears, and her gaze hardened. She looked around the house, and her voice broke, mixed with sobs. "He's not here. He really left." She turned to me, grabbing my shoulders forcefully. Her red-rimmed eyes stared at me. "Emily, listen to me carefully. We have to go to the hospital now. Your husband, Michael, is in serious trouble." Her last sentence was like a thunderbolt. Serious trouble. He wasn't enjoying himself with his lover. What had really happened in the last 2 days, and why did my mother-in-law know everything? Serious trouble. Those 2 words echoed in my head, creating a chaos even greater than the hunger that tormented me. I looked at my mother-in-law, searching for an explanation in her tear-filled eyes, but she gave me no time to think. "Quick to the hospital first," she said, with a determination that allowed for no argument. She picked up Leo, who was delirious with fever, and grabbed my arm, leading me directly to the car waiting outside. On the way to the hospital, Carol was constantly on the phone. Her voice was urgent, giving orders to someone on the other end. Tony, it's Carol. I've found my daughter-in-law and grandson. They were locked in the house. The boy has a very high fever. Send someone to the children's hospital right now. And one more thing, the GPS tracker on Michael's car still shows it's in Miami Beach. Check it again. Miami Beach. Wasn't he supposed to be on a business trip? I was stunned. Everything was getting more and more confusing. When we arrived at the hospital, my mother-in-law handled all the paperwork quickly. Leo was taken directly to the emergency room. Seeing my little boy being cared for by doctors and nurses gave me a moment's respite. I collapsed onto a cold seat in the waiting room, suddenly feeling a sharp pain all over my body. The hunger and exhaustion hit me all at once. I nearly fainted. My mother-in-law ran to buy me a hot drink and a sandwich. "Eat, dear, eat to get your strength back," she said, her voice full of concern. I took the sandwich, but I couldn't swallow. The tears started falling again. "Carol, what happened? How did you know we were locked in? And Michael, Carol sat down next to me, sighing deeply. She stared into the distance and began to tell the story. A story that made me realize I had never really known this woman. "I've been suspicious of Michael for a long time, Emily," she began, her voice low and sad. "Ever since that Valerie reappeared. I'm his mother. I know his weak, womanizing character very well. But I had no proof. I could only watch in silence." She told me she had noticed the changes in Michael, his late arrivals, the secret phone calls. She tried to talk to him, but he always denied everything, saying it was her imagination. She knew that if she made a scene without proof, you and Leo would be the ones to suffer in the end. She didn't want the family to fall apart. So, she continued, "About 2 months ago, I decided to do something I never thought I would. I asked Tony, a cousin of mine who's a retired cop turned PI, to help me keep an eye on him. Tony was the one who installed that mysterious black box by the door. It wasn't an alarm. It was a miniature tracking and recording device. He was also the one who secretly placed a GPS tracker in Michael's car. I didn't want to invade your privacy, but I had no other choice. I had to know what he was doing behind your back," she said bitterly. And what Tony discovered was much worse than she had imagined. They found out that Michael wasn't just seeing Valerie. He had also gotten into gambling. Valerie wasn't the weak, innocent girl she appeared to be. She was a predator who seduced men with money, dragged them into gambling, and then cleaned out their accounts. The morning. Michael said he was leaving on a trip. My mother-in-law's voice trembled. Tony warned me that the GPS signal from his car wasn't heading to the airport but straight to Miami. And I know there's a very famous casino scene there. "But why did he lock us in?" I asked, my voice still shaky. "That's what terrified me the most." Carol squeezed my hand. "Tony told me it's a common tactic of Valerie and her accomplices. They find a way to isolate the victim from their family, cut off all communication so they can't ask for help when they're taking all their money. Michael locked you in not because he hated you but out of fear. Fear that you would find out, fear that you would call me, fear that I would stop him." I was speechless. Michael's cruel act didn't stem from hatred, but from extreme cowardice and selfishness. He had sacrificed the safety of his wife and son just so he could calmly walk into his lover's trap. "I tried calling you for 2 days, but I couldn't get through. I knew immediately something was wrong. I called Michael, and he didn't answer either. I knew he was in deep trouble," she said helplessly. "And half an hour ago, Tony sent me a message. He said Michael had lost everything. Not just the money he had with him, but he had also signed over the car. Now the loan sharks are holding him. They're threatening that if no one brings the money to bail him out tonight, they'll—" She didn't finish the sentence, but I understood. The serious trouble she spoke of wasn't a car accident, but mortal danger. That's why she was so terrified, to the point of grabbing a sledgehammer to break down the door. She was afraid of losing her only son, and she was also afraid that if she had arrived a little later, she would have lost her daughter-in-law and grandson too. A horrible truth had come to light, but a bigger question remained. With a husband held by loan sharks and an uncertain future, what should I do? And my mother-in-law so distant until now, was she truly a reliable ally? The story from my mother-in-law ended in a heavy silence. I sat there, my mind in a whirlwind, trying to process the terrible information I had just received. My husband, the man I once loved, was not only an adulterer and a cruel father, but also a compulsive gambler, a foolish victim who had dived headfirst into the lion's den. And Valerie, the fragile-looking woman, turned out to be a wolf in sheep's clothing, a ruthless professional con artist. "Carol, are you going to bail him out?" I asked in a hoarse voice. It was the first question that came to my mind. A complex question filled with resentment, but also curiosity about her reaction. Carol looked at me, her eyes red but with a cold determination I had never seen in her before. Bail him out. Yes, I'll get him out. But not now, and not in the way he expects. She squeezed my hand harder. Before I get him out, I have to make him see how stupid he has been and the crime he has committed against you. Just then, a middle-aged man, tall and with a firm face, approached us. Carol, I'm here, he said in a deep voice. How's the boy? Tony, my mother-in-law, stood up, her voice calmer. Thanks for coming. He's in the ER. She turned to me. Emily, this is Tony, the one I told you about. I nodded, still overwhelmed. Tony didn't sit down. He opened his briefcase, took out a thin file and a tablet. This is what I've gathered in the last 48 hours, he said professionally. Maybe Mrs. Emily should see this first. He handed me the tablet. The screen lit up, showing a series of images in chronological order. The first was a photo of Michael and Valerie hand in hand entering a luxury resort in Miami Beach. The second, they were in a seaside restaurant laughing. But in the following photos, the atmosphere changed completely. They were photos taken from a distance inside a casino. Michael was at a poker table, his face tense, sweating. The chips in front of him were rapidly dwindling. Valerie by his side no longer looked tender. She occasionally whispered something in the ear of a menacing-looking man standing behind him. And the last photo made me shudder. Michael was huddled in a corner of a room surrounded by 3 tattooed men. His expression was no longer that of a tense gambler, but the absolute fear of a trapped prey. Valerie was in the distance, arms crossed, looking at him with an unfamiliar coldness. She was no longer his lover. She was his jailer. Michael lost a total of over $300. 000. Tony said, his voice, as monotonous as someone reading a report. He lost all his personal savings, the new car he was making payments on, and finally signed an IOU with Loan Shark interest rates. $300. 000. I murmured the figure. It was unimaginable. Where did he get so much money to gamble in just 2 days? As if reading my mind, my mother-in-law said bitterly, he secretly took the money from the joint savings account you two had without you knowing. He had been planning this trip for a long time. Tony opened the file, pointing to a bank statement. Here's the proof. Mr. Michael made multiple small withdrawals over the last month to prevent you, Mrs. Emily, from finding out. Additionally, we've found evidence that he tried to use the house as collateral for a loan, but it didn't go through in time. I looked at the numbers, the letters on the paper. It was all clear. Michael wasn't seduced by accident. He actively planned to get money to go gamble with his lover, and for that he ruthlessly sacrificed his own family. The act of locking us in and leaving us to starve was no longer just cowardice. It was a calculated crime. He wanted to silence me to prevent me from ruining his fun. At that moment, the ER door opened. A nurse came out smiling. The boy's fever has broken. His condition is stable. We'll be moving him to a room soon. A huge weight was lifted from my chest. I burst into tears, but this time, they were tears of relief. My son was safe. But as soon as my worry for my son dissipated, another question arose in my mind. My husband had committed an unforgivable crime, but he was also in mortal danger. Between hatred and the little affection that remained, what should I do? And what did my mother-in-law's words that she would get him out in a different way really mean? When Leo was moved to a room, I could finally breathe. He was sleeping soundly after the fever. His face had regained its rosy color. I sat by his side, holding his small hand, feeling an infinite gratitude. Thank God my son was okay. My mother-in-law and Tony had gone out into the hallway to talk. I could hear fragments of their voices, no longer panicked, but firm and determined. They were discussing a plan I still knew nothing about. A while later, she returned to the room completely calm. She pulled up a chair and sat next to me. The silence in the hospital room was strange, broken only by the rhythmic beep of the monitor. My mother-in-law and I, 2 women who could barely hold a 10-minute conversation before, were now sitting side by side sharing the same anguish. But this silence was no longer one of distance, but of expectation. We both knew we needed to have a heart-to-heart conversation. It was she who finally broke the silence. Emily, I know you're very confused right now and that you hate Michael. I have no right to ask you to forgive him because I can't even forgive him myself right now. She looked at me with eyes full of weariness and remorse. But I need you. I need you to help me with one thing. I looked at her surprised. She needed me, the daughter-in-law she had always kept at a distance. What do you want me to do? I want us together to teach Michael a lesson. Her voice was not a plea, but a proposal, an invitation to form an alliance. He's my son, my blood. I can't stand by while those thugs kill him. But I also can't let him think that just by crying and begging all his sins will be forgiven. He has to pay Emily. He has to pay a very high price for his stupidity, his selfishness, and his cruelty. I remained silent. Her proposal was unexpected. I thought she would find a way to gather the money to rescue her son, but no. She wanted to teach him a lesson. As if understanding my doubt, she continued, her voice clear and logical. But we're not just going to hand them the money so easily either. That would only spoil him more and wouldn't solve the root problem Valerie and her accomplices. She told me the plan she and Tony had just devised. Tony had contacts in the underworld. He would find a way to contact the leader holding Michael. They wouldn't present themselves as family, but as a third party, another of Michael's creditors coming to negotiate the debt. Our goal, she emphasized, is not to pay them, but to buy time. In the meantime, Tony will gather more evidence on Valerie's gambling and scamming ring so the police can completely dismantle it. At the same time, buying time will let Michael taste fear, desperation, so he understands what my son and I felt when he locked us in. I listened amazed at the calculation and coldness of my mother-in-law's plan. The woman I considered old-fashioned and who only cared blindly for family honor turned out to have a cool head and iron will. It wasn't that she didn't love her son. She loved him in a different, very down-to-earth way. "But I need you," she repeated, this time looking me directly in the eyes with sincerity. "I need you on my side, because in this story you're not just my daughter-in-law. You're the biggest victim. Only you have the legal standing to press charges against him. And only with your support will this plan succeed. If you don't agree, I won't force you. I'll find loans myself. I'll sell my house to save him. But if I do that, I'll never be able to look you or my grandson in the face again." She had laid all her cards on the table. She had given me the power to decide. To decide Michael's fate, the future of our relationship, and also the path I would take. I could choose to ignore it, let the law handle it, or worse, let the loan sharks do it. It would be a quick and satisfying revenge. Or I could join this game, a risky game, but one that sought not just revenge, but also to teach a lesson, to bring back a wayward man, even though he might never be the same again. I looked at my son sleeping peacefully. I thought of Michael, his father. As terrible as he was still my son's father. I didn't want my son to grow up with a father killed by thugs, but I also didn't want him to have a father incapable of acknowledging his mistakes. Finally, I looked up and met my mother-in-law's eyes. "Okay, I'll do it with you." In that moment, I knew that the most unexpected and strange alliance had been formed between a mother-in-law and a daughter-in-law, based not on affection but on a common goal, salvation and punishment. And I couldn't have imagined that this decision would lead us into a direct confrontation, not only with the con artists, but also with the darkest corners of our own family. My agreement seemed to untie an invisible knot in my mother-in-law's heart. She let out a sigh of relief. Her tense shoulders relaxed. "Thank you, dear. I knew I wasn't wrong about you," she said, her voice a little shaky. For the first time, I saw in her eyes not judgment or distance, but trust, a surrender. From that moment on, the small hospital room became a makeshift command center. While I stayed at the hospital taking care of Leo, my mother-in-law and Tony went into action with urgency and method. Tony, with his experience and contacts, quickly identified the leader of the group holding Michael. His street name was The Shark, a known figure in Miami's underbelly, specializing in illegal high-stakes games and loan sharking. "We can't underestimate him," Tony said over the phone to my mother-in-law. I, sitting next to her, heard everything. "He's cunning and cruel. We have to play our cards very carefully." The first play, as they had agreed, was the approach. Tony didn't go himself. He sent a former subordinate, a rough-looking man who knew the rules of the street, to meet directly with the shark. This man didn't introduce himself as Michael's family, but as the representative of a much larger creditor from New York to whom Michael also owed a huge sum. "Michael owes my boss money," the man told the shark, with an air of superiority. "I heard he's with you. My boss wants to talk to see how we can sort out this debt. We're not interested in anything happening to our debtor before he pays." This tactic worked immediately. The shark, who had the upper hand, suddenly found himself in a defensive position. He could no longer do whatever he wanted with Michael, because now he wasn't just his debtor. He was forced to agree to a negotiation. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law and I did our part. Following Tony's advice, the first thing we had to do was cut off any financial escape routes for Michael, so he wouldn't get any illusions that he could easily solve everything with money. The next morning, we went to the bank together with all the legal documents proving our joint ownership of the accounts and properties. We requested a freeze on all savings accounts, a block on all credit cards in Michael's name, and also the joint account. The bank teller looked at us strangely. "Are you sure freezing accounts is a complicated process if you want to reopen them later?" "I'm sure," I replied firmly. My mother-in-law beside me nodded in silence. Leaving the bank, I was filled with a strange feeling. I had just carried out an act against my own husband and her son alongside my mother-in-law, but I felt no satisfaction, only a cold determination. It was what had to be done. The next step was even more important: talking to a lawyer. Tony recommended an excellent lawyer specializing in civil and criminal cases. Sitting in his plush office, I told him my whole story: the confinement, the starvation, the evidence of infidelity, and Michael's gambling. My mother-in-law beside me added the information Tony had investigated. The lawyer, a middle-aged man named Mr. Garcia, listened attentively, reviewing every photo, every bank statement. When I finished, he adjusted his glasses and looked at us seriously. "Ladies, this case is very complex. On the civil side, you, Mrs. Emily, can file for divorce and a favorable division of assets as Mr. Michael has seriously violated the terms of your marriage. But on the criminal side, his actions of unlawful confinement and intentional infliction of emotional distress can also be prosecuted." He paused and added, "And most importantly, with the evidence of Valerie's scam ring, we can cooperate with the police to dismantle it. But it will be dangerous. Have you thought this through?" "We've thought it through very well," my mother-in-law replied without hesitation. "We don't just want justice for my daughter-in-law, but also to bring those criminals to justice, so they can't continue to harm others." I looked at her with admiration. She wasn't just thinking about her son, but about society. "All right," Lawyer Garcia nodded. "Then we'll start preparing the case. First, we need to get a statement from Mr. Michael himself." But how to get his statement when he was being held captive? That was the big question. And the answer came with an unexpected phone call, a call from the very enemy we wanted to unmask. But it wasn't Valerie. It was an unknown voice claiming to be one of the Shark's people with a request no one could have predicted. The call came late one night, just as I had put Leo to sleep after a long day at the hospital. The number was unknown. My gut told me something was wrong. I looked at my mother-in-law, who was reading in a corner. She also looked up expectantly. I took a deep breath, answered, and put it on speaker. "Hello." On the other end was not Michael's voice, nor that of a thug. It was the voice of Valerie, the same clear, weak, and trembling voice I had heard on Michael's old recordings. "Is this Emily?" I was stunned. My mother-in-law put down her book and narrowed her eyes, looking at the phone. "Why was she calling me? It is." "What do you want?" I tried to make my voice sound cold. There was a silence for a few seconds. I could hear her sobbing. "Mrs. Emily, please save Michael. I'm begging you." "Save him," I scoffed. "You got him into this, and now you're asking me to save him. Who is this act for?" "It's not like that. I swear I was tricked too," Valerie cried out. They're not my people. I was just a pawn. They say if they don't get the $300,000 tonight, they're going to. They're going to cut off one of Michael's fingers. I'm so scared. I don't have any money. My only option was to call you. I'm begging you. For the love you have for Michael. For your son." Her words were choppy, desperate, and they sounded very real. But I was no longer the naive, trusting girl I used to be. I looked at my mother-in-law. She shook her head, signaling me not to believe it. "And why don't you call the police?" I asked. "I don't dare," she whimpered. "They threatened to kill me too." "Ma'am, only you can save Michael. You have money. $300,000 is nothing to you. I'm begging you. It's like I'm kneeling before you." Hearing the word money, I felt a deep revulsion. It turns out that even at this moment to her, I was just an ATM. "I don't have any money," I replied, my voice icy. "My husband took it all to gamble with you. Have you forgotten?" "No, that's not right," Valerie stammered, seemingly surprised by my response. At that moment, I heard a man's voice on the other end. "Who the hell are you talking to? Give me the phone." Then another hoarse, desperate voice echoed. It was Michael. Emily, it's me. Help me, please. I was wrong. I know I was wrong. Save me. They're going to." His voice was cut off by the sound of a heavy blow followed by a groan of pain. My heart clenched instinctively. Despite hating him, hearing him being beaten affected me. Hello, Michael, are you okay?" I yelled. The man's voice from before came back on the line, this time threatening. You're his wife, huh? Listen up. Your husband owes us $300,000. If we don't see the money in this account in 1 hour, don't blame us for being cruel. His fingers are nice, but it'd be a waste to keep them. He recited an account number and continued. 1 hour. Remember that. He hung up. The room was plunged into a deathly silence. I looked at my mother-in-law. Her face was pale, her hands clenched so tightly her veins stood out. She was afraid for her son. I know, but in her eyes, I didn't see blind panic. She looked at me as if to ask, "So what are you going to do now?" The entire call, from Valerie's voice to Michael's cries and the thug's threats, had been recorded on my phone. It was exactly the statement Lawyer Garcia needed. But it was also a death sentence hanging over Michael's head. Emily, my mother-in-law, said, her voice trembling, "What do we do now?" Carol didn't answer immediately. She got up and paced back and forth. The internal struggle was evident on her face. On one hand, the life of her only son. On the other, the plan they had laid out, the justice she wanted. If we brought the money, Michael would be safe, but he would never learn his lesson, and Valerie's network would go unpunished. If we did nothing, Michael's life. My mother-in-law's phone vibrated. A message. She opened it and showed it to me. It was from Tony. "It's all set. The police have surrounded the resort. They just need the order to go in. The final decision is yours." We had less than an hour. The decision was in our hands, a decision that could change the fate of many people. And I suddenly realized that this was perhaps the greatest test life had ever put me through. The message from Tony was like the final command that pushed the pendulum of fate to its highest point. 60 minutes to decide on a man's life, to determine the outcome of a game filled with blood and tears. I looked at my mother-in-law, and she looked at me. In her deep eyes, an immense struggle was reflected. I knew she was waiting for my consent. "I'll do whatever you decide, Carol," I said with a calmness that surprised even myself. "After all, he's your son." Carol shook her head, a slow, tired gesture. "No, Emily. He's my son, but he's also your husband and my grandson's father. You are the one who has been hurt the most. You have the right to decide. I won't blame you, whatever your choice may be." She had granted me the power to judge, a cruel and heavy power. I closed my eyes. The image of Michael screaming on the phone came back to my mind. Despite hating him, did I really want him to die? Did I want my son to grow up without the chance to ever see his father again? But then the image of my son with a fever weak in my arms, the image of the locked door and the cruel phrase, "You, guys won't starve for 3 days," appeared with overwhelming clarity. My hesitation vanished. Forgiving Michael at this moment would not be an act of compassion but of weakness. It would be an insult to the suffering we had endured. And most importantly, it wouldn't stop people like Valerie from continuing to harm others. I opened my eyes and looked at my mother-in-law. "Carol, I can't let him die. But I can't let him get away with it either." I picked up my phone and dialed Tony's number. "Tony, it's Emily. My mother-in-law and I have made a decision. Tell the police to move in." I paused. "But could you ask them to do everything possible to ensure Michael's safety? He is, after all, also a victim who was deceived." "Understood." Tony's voice on the other end was firm. "Don't worry. That's their job." The call ended. It was all decided. My mother-in-law and I sat together without saying a word. We could only wait. Time passed, with excruciating slowness. Every minute that ticked by, I imagined the police raid. Gunshots, screams. I squeezed my mother-in-law's hand tightly. Hers was ice-cold and also trembling. No matter how tough she appeared, she was still a mother worried about her son. About half an hour later, my mother-in-law's phone rang. It was Tony. She snatched it up. "What happened, Tony?" "What happened?" she asked breathlessly. I held my breath, listening. "It's done, Carol." Tony's voice sounded tired but relieved. "We got them all. Both the shark and Valerie and their cronies. The police stormed in just as they were about to assault Michael to record a video to demand the ransom. They arrived just in time. And Michael, how is he?" my mother-in-law asked, her voice breaking. "He's safe. Just some superficial bruises. He's also been detained to give a statement. Carol, Emily, be prepared. You'll probably have to go to the precinct tomorrow." Clack! The phone slipped from my mother-in-law's hands, hitting the tile floor. She slumped into the chair, covering her face with her hands, and broke down crying. This time it wasn't a cry of remorse or conflict, but of release. She wept openly like a child. She cried for the sleepless nights, for the anguish, the fear, and for her guilty son, who was finally safe even if in the hands of the law. I went over, put an arm around her shoulders, and patted her gently. I said nothing. At that moment, any words of comfort were superfluous. The two of us women who had weathered a storm together. The storm had taken away a husband, a son, but it had also torn down the walls of mistrust and misunderstanding and had brought us closer than ever. The next day, when my mother-in-law and I arrived at the police precinct, we saw Michael again. He was sitting in an interrogation room, his face haggard, his clothes wrinkled, and the marks from the restraints still visible on his wrists. When he saw us, he lowered his head, not daring to meet our eyes. His former confidence and elegance had completely vanished, leaving only the pathetic image of a loser. The detective showed us a video recorded by the resort's security cameras. The video showed the whole scene, Michael being beaten, threatened, and Valerie, the lover for whom he had risked everything, standing by with her arms crossed, watching and even smiling cruelly. I looked at Michael, then at the video. I no longer felt hatred, only a deep pity. He had paid too high a price for his blindness. The case was processed quickly with irrefutable evidence. From the audio recordings and bank statements to the statements from all parties, the scam ring of Valerie and the Shark was completely dismantled. They were charged with multiple crimes: fraud, organizing, illegal gambling, unlawful confinement. And Michael, he couldn't evade his responsibility either. Although he was considered a victim in the kidnapping, his actions of locking up his wife and child, his involvement in gambling, and the misappropriation of marital assets were criminal offenses. He stood before the judge and quietly pleaded guilty. He turned to look at me, his eyes filled with a belated regret. I simply turned away in silence. It was all over. The price of betrayal wasn't just years in prison, but the collapse of an entire family, the loss of a trust that could never be recovered. And as the courtroom door closed, I knew that an old chapter of my life had also closed forever. 6 months after the trial, my life had found a new, strangely peaceful direction. The suburban house once my prison was sold. I used part of the money to buy a smaller, cozy, sun-filled apartment closer to the city center. It wasn't as big as before, but it gave me a sense of security, of real control. The divorce from Michael was finalized quickly. He received a 2-year suspended sentence for the crime of unlawful confinement, a sentence considered lenient, likely because the court took into account that he was also a victim and had confessed his guilt. I didn't appeal or demand any additional compensation. For me, freedom and peace for my son were the most valuable things. My mother-in-law, Carol, after everything that had happened, seemed to have become a different person. She was no longer the strict, distant woman of before. The storm had taken a son from her, but in a way it had given her back a daughter-in-law and a grandson in a way no one expected. She didn't live with me. She said she needed time to reflect. She moved into her parents' old house, living a quiet life tending her garden. But almost every weekend she would take the bus to visit her grandson. Every time she came, she brought all sorts of produce from her garden, freshly picked vegetables, a dozen farm-fresh eggs. We didn't talk much about the past. The wounds, though scarred, still ached if touched. We talked about everyday things, how Leo was doing in school, my new job. I had left my old job and with the capital I had left opened a small children's bookstore. It had been my dream for a long time, a place where I could work and spend time with my son. The relationship between my mother-in-law and me was no longer based on kinship, but on a strange bond forged from the pieces of pain. One afternoon, as I was walking her to the bus stop, she suddenly turned and took my hand. "Emily," she said with some hesitation. When Michael gets out of prison, if he comes looking for you again, will you forgive him?" I was silent for a long moment. The anger, the hatred of the past seemed to have dissipated with time, leaving only a melancholy. "Carol," I replied slowly. "To forgive or not, maybe it's not important anymore. I just hope that after everything he learns to be a good person, someone who takes responsibility for his actions. But getting back together, that's impossible." She nodded without saying anything more and quietly got on the bus. I stood there watching the bus pull away, feeling light. Being able to give that answer with complete serenity meant that I had truly moved past it. As for Michael, he occasionally wrote letters from prison. They no longer contained lies or pleas, just clumsy lines talking about his life in prison, about the long nights of reflection. He said that only in those days without freedom had he truly understood the value of the word family. He asked for forgiveness from me, from our son, and from his mother. I read the letters without replying and quietly stored them in a box. Perhaps that was also a lesson he had to learn for himself. My life went on peacefully. My little bookstore was getting more and more customers. Leo was growing up healthy, smart, and loved his mother very much. He never asked about his father, perhaps because in his small world, the love of his mother and grandmother was more than enough. One day, Leo brought home a drawing he had made at daycare. In it, 3 people were holding hands under the sun, a woman with long hair, a little boy, and a grandmother with gray hair. "This is Mommy, this is Leo, and this is Grandma," my son said, pointing to each one with his clear little voice. "This is my family." I hugged him tightly, and tears rolled down my cheeks. But this time, they were tears of happiness. I had lost a husband, but I had found a mother. I had been through a hellish marriage, but from those ashes, I had rebuilt a new definition of the word family. A family that didn't need to be perfect or complete. It just needed to have love and mutual respect. And I knew that ahead my son and I had a long road, but it would undoubtedly be a road filled with sunshine.